The grandfather clock in my parents' formal living room chimed 6 times, marking another hour of what had become a monthly ritual of disappointment and career counseling. Dr. Harold Morrison sat in his leather recliner, surrounded by the mahogany bookshelves displaying 40 years of medical journals and professional awards from his distinguished career as Chief of Cardiology at Presbyterian Medical Center. Across from him, my mother Eleanor arranged and rearranged the medical journals on the coffee table, her nervous energy betraying the anxiety that had defined our family dynamics since I'd supposedly failed to follow in my father's footsteps. "Jennifer, it's time we addressed the elephant in the room," Harold began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had commanded respect in hospital boardrooms for decades. "You're 33 years old, and you're still pretending this medical career is going to work out. Maybe it's time to accept that medicine isn't your calling." I sat quietly on the antique sofa, wearing my simple black sweater and jeans, accustomed to these interventions that had become increasingly frequent as my parents' patience with my unconventional career path wore thin. In their minds, I was Dr. Jennifer Morrison, the daughter who had somehow managed to squander every advantage and opportunity they'd provided. Eleanor joined the conversation with her characteristic blend of maternal concern and professional disappointment. As the former head nurse at the same hospital where Harold had built his career, she understood medical hierarchies and couldn't comprehend how her daughter had ended up in what she perceived as healthcare's equivalent of professional purgatory. "Sweetheart, your father and I have been discussing your situation with Dr. Patterson from the hospital administration," Eleanor said, her voice mixing love with frustration. "There are opportunities in medical device sales, pharmaceutical consulting, even healthcare marketing. Positions that would use your medical background without requiring you to keep failing at clinical practice." The words stung with their casual cruelty. My parents had constructed an elaborate narrative about my professional life based on fragments of conversations and their own assumptions about what constituted medical success. They believed I was struggling through various low-level clinical positions, moving from hospital to hospital because I couldn't establish myself in any particular specialty. Harold leaned forward, his expression mixing paternal concern with professional exasperation. "The truth is, Jennifer, medical dropout suits you better than doctor. You've tried family medicine, emergency medicine, internal medicine, nothing seems to stick. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that you don't have what it takes for clinical leadership." The irony was profound. My parents had spent the last 5 years encouraging me to abandon medicine for more suitable career options, completely unaware that their daughter was actually one of the most successful healthcare entrepreneurs in the region. They didn't know that my frequent job changes represented strategic positions at different hospitals within the network I was building, or that my modest lifestyle was a deliberate choice to maintain privacy while managing a rapidly expanding medical empire. "I appreciate your concern," I replied diplomatically, though I knew this response would only intensify their efforts to enlighten me about my career limitations. Eleanor pulled out what appeared to be a prepared presentation folder, clearly indicating that this wasn't a spontaneous conversation but a carefully orchestrated intervention. "We've researched several alternatives that would utilize your medical education without the stress and uncertainty of clinical practice. Medical writing, regulatory consulting, even teaching at the community college level." Harold nodded approvingly, his investment in my career redirection evident in the thoroughness of their preparation. "The pharmaceutical industry needs people with medical backgrounds who can interface between research teams and regulatory agencies. It's intellectually challenging work with better compensation than whatever you're making in these temporary clinical positions." My phone buzzed with a text from my chief financial officer. "Board meeting moved to Tuesday. Q3 revenues exceed $1.2 billion across all facilities. Expansion into pediatric cardiac surgery approved." I glanced at it briefly before returning my attention to my parents' career counseling session. "The reality is that clinical medicine has become increasingly competitive and specialized," Harold continued, drawing on his own experience managing medical departments. "Success requires not just clinical knowledge but business acumen, leadership skills, and strategic thinking. These aren't necessarily your strengths, and there's no shame in acknowledging that." Eleanor added her perspective from the nursing side of healthcare administration. "The industry is changing rapidly. Electronic medical records, population health management, value-based care contracts. Hospitals need people who understand both clinical operations and business strategy. but that requires a different skill set than direct patient care. Through this extended analysis of my professional shortcomings, I maintained my composure, occasionally asking questions about the alternative careers they'd researched or expressing appreciation for their concern about my future. The truth was far more complex than they could imagine, but their assumptions had become so deeply entrenched that contradicting them seemed counterproductive. The mood in the living room shifted dramatically when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Eleanor answered, returning moments later with a concerned expression and a business card in her hand. "Harold, there's a Dr. Williams here to see us. She says it's urgent and relates to my biopsy results from last week." My father's confident demeanor shifted immediately. The routine mammogram that had revealed suspicious calcifications had been weighing on both my parents' minds, though they'd been trying to maintain optimism while waiting for definitive pathology results. Dr. Sarah Williams entered the living room, her expression serious as she reviewed the medical file in her hands. I recognized her immediately as one of the senior oncologists at Morrison Medical Center, though my parents had no reason to understand the significance of her visit or my professional relationship with their medical team. "Mrs. Morrison, I've completed my review of your biopsy results and imaging studies," Dr. Williams began, her voice carrying the measured tone oncologists use when delivering life-changing news. "The diagnosis is confirmed: invasive ductal carcinoma with aggressive cellular characteristics. This requires immediate and comprehensive treatment." Eleanor's face went pale as she processed the diagnosis, while Harold's medical training kicked in as he began asking detailed questions about staging, treatment options, and prognosis. The confident physician who had been dispensing career advice moments earlier was suddenly a frightened husband facing his wife's cancer diagnosis. "What are our treatment options?" Harold asked, his voice betraying the vulnerability of someone whose medical expertise couldn't protect the person he loved most. "Given the tumor's characteristics and your wife's overall health profile, I'm recommending an experimental immunotherapy protocol combined with targeted radiation therapy," Dr. Williams explained. "It's a cutting-edge treatment that's shown remarkable success rates for this specific cancer type, but it's extremely expensive and requires special authorization." Eleanor grasped Harold's hand, her nursing background helping her understand the implications of requiring special authorization for experimental treatments. "What kind of authorization? How long does that process take?" "The treatment costs approximately $800,000 over 6 months, and it's not covered by standard insurance protocols. However, Morrison Medical Center has a special fund for experimental cancer treatments that can cover the full cost. The decision requires approval from our hospital CEO, but she's typically very responsive to these requests when the clinical evidence supports the treatment." Harold's relief was palpable as he processed this information. "Thank you, Dr. Williams. When can we meet with the CEO to discuss this approval? Eleanor needs to start treatment as soon as possible." Dr. Williams consulted her tablet, checking the hospital's administrative schedule. "Actually, I have excellent news on that front. Our CEO happens to be here this afternoon reviewing other cases. Dr. Jennifer Morrison can meet with you immediately if you'd like to proceed." The silence that followed was deafening. Harold stared at Dr. Williams with an expression of complete bewilderment, while Eleanor looked back and forth between the oncologist and me as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "Dr. Jennifer Morrison," Harold whispered. "But that's our daughter. Jennifer, you're not a CEO. You're struggling through various clinical positions." Dr. Williams looked genuinely confused by Harold's response. "Sir, Dr. Morrison is the founder and CEO of Morrison Medical Center. She established the hospital 6 years ago and has built it into one of the region's premier cancer treatment facilities. She'll be personally reviewing your wife's case." I stood up from the sofa, setting down my coffee cup and accepting Eleanor's medical files from Dr. Williams. As I reviewed her pathology reports, imaging studies, and treatment recommendations, I could feel my parents' stares burning into me. "The tumor characteristics are concerning but definitely treatable with the immunotherapy protocol Dr. Williams is recommending," I said clinically, studying Eleanor's test results with the practiced eye of someone who had reviewed thousands of similar cases. "The experimental treatment has shown exceptional results for this specific genetic profile. I'm approving immediate enrollment in the protocol." Harold's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he watched me discuss his wife's cancer treatment with the clinical authority of someone who made these life-and-death decisions regularly. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Williams said formally, given the patient's age and the aggressive nature of this particular tumor, what's your assessment of treatment prognosis? Excellent prognosis with this protocol, I replied, making notations on Eleanor's chart. We're looking at better than 90% 5-year survival rates for patients with her profile who complete this treatment regimen. I'll want to monitor her response closely, but I'm very optimistic about her outcomes. As Dr. Williams departed with my treatment approval, Harold and Eleanor remained frozen in stunned silence. The afternoon that had begun with proclamations about my medical career failures had suddenly transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated. Jennifer, Eleanor's voice was barely audible, you're going to oversee my cancer treatment. I'm going to ensure you receive the best possible care using protocols that our research team has developed specifically for your type of cancer, I confirmed. You're going to be fine, Mom. The truth began to unfold as my parents processed this complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about my professional life. The failed medical career they'd been encouraging me to abandon was actually the leadership of one of the region's most advanced cancer treatment centers. The temporary clinical positions they'd worried about were actually strategic roles I'd taken to understand different aspects of healthcare delivery while building my medical network. But Jennifer, how long have you been a hospital CEO? How long have you owned a medical center? Harold asked, his distinguished medical career suddenly seeming modest compared to his daughter's entrepreneurial achievements. I founded Morrison Medical Center 7 years ago with a focus on innovative cancer treatment and research, I explained. We've since expanded to include cardiac care, neurosurgery, and pediatric specialties. The medical center employs over 2,000 people and treats approximately 50,000 patients annually. Eleanor, processing both her cancer diagnosis and the revelation about her daughter's hidden success, found her voice first. Jennifer, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling professionally? Mom, every time I tried to explain my work in hospital administration or medical research, you redirected the conversation toward pharmaceutical sales or medical writing. You'd already decided what my career looked like before you bothered to learn what it actually involved. Over the following weeks, as Eleanor began her cancer treatment using protocols I had helped develop, more details emerged about my actual professional life. The medical journals scattered around my apartment weren't light reading, they contained my published research on cancer treatment innovations. The conferences I attended weren't networking events, they were presentations of my clinical findings to other oncologists and hospital administrators. But what affected my parents most was learning that while Harold had built a successful career as a cardiologist within the traditional medical establishment, his daughter had created an entirely new medical facility focused on advancing cancer care and improving patient outcomes. The medical dropout they'd been worried about had actually achieved something Harold had never imagined possible. Eleanor's treatment was remarkably successful. The experimental immunotherapy protocol eliminated her cancer completely, with minimal side effects and rapid recovery. As she celebrated her clean scans and returned to full health, Harold often reflected on the irony of their family situation. Jennifer, I can't believe we spent years telling you to give up on medicine while you were building one of the most advanced cancer treatment centers in the region, Harold said during one of Eleanor's follow-up appointments. Dad, you weren't wrong about medicine requiring business thinking and strategic planning. You were wrong about assuming I wasn't capable of both clinical excellence and entrepreneurial leadership. Some parent-child relationships are complicated by different definitions of medical success and professional achievement. Ours was simplified by the recognition that when Eleanor's life was threatened by cancer, the daughter they dismissed as a medical dropout was the person with the knowledge, resources, and authority to save her. The next family gathering had a very different tone. Harold still discussed his cardiology achievements, but with new awareness that his daughter's medical innovations operated on an entirely different scale. Eleanor still worried about my career, but now she understood that the person she'd been concerned about had actually built something extraordinary while they weren't paying attention. As Eleanor completed her treatment and returned to full health, our family found a new equilibrium. The monthly career counseling sessions stopped entirely, replaced by conversations about medical research, hospital administration, and the future of cancer treatment. Harold began referring colleagues to Morrison Medical Center, proud to recommend the facility his daughter had built. Some families struggle with unmet expectations and perceived failures until dramatic events force reassessment. Ours was transformed by the realization that the daughter they'd been trying to redirect away from medicine had actually found her calling in work that literally meant life or death for thousands of patients, including the person who mattered most to all of us.